Today is International Design Day, a global initiative established in 1995 by the International Council of Design, also known as ICoD. And it's celebrated every April 27th and dedicated to making the case for design's essential role in society, culture, and human experience. Every year, ICoD invites a member organization to host the day and shape its theme. And in 2026, that honor belongs to SEGD, the Society for Experiential Graphic Design. This year's theme is The Spaces in Between, an invitation to look beyond what we make and towards the moments where design quietly shapes how people relate to one another, where strangers become communities and where belonging is built. The conversations you're about to hear come from designers and leaders whose work lives in exactly these spaces. So we're really glad that you're here. And just to introduce myself, I'm Cybelle Jones, CEO of SEGD, and I'm really excited to introduce someone who's not just a guest in this series today, but also someone who actually helped conceive of the theme for this year. New is the founder and principal of Room for Magic. It's a practice working at the intersection of brand, culture, community, and social change, with clients ranging from the Ford Foundation and the Art for Justice Fund to the Jordan brand and Headspace. He is also co-founder and managing partner and creative director of Deem Journal. And if you don't know it, Google it, get yourself a copy, because it's one of the most important and genuinely provocative publications in contemporary design, centered on design as a social practice. And thank you, because it's so rare that we have any publications anymore, any, quarterly or annual publications of that caliber. So thank you, New, for doing that. New is influenced by his Liberian heritage, and he has a lifelong love of counterculture, shoes, which we were talking about before we went on recording, music, art, basically the edges where culture actually moves and vibrates. And New presents keynotes around the globe and is always invited to talk about how communities can reclaim their futures. So, New, when we approached the board and said we were going to do this International Design Day, I don't know if I know I voluntold you a lot, but I think, I don't know if you naturally volunteered, but you helped to write the brief and you kind of we all had a brainstorm, and then you fortunately said, let me try to take this back and make some sense of all this. And that became the title. I think there were 3 options, and one of them was The Space in Between. And you talked about in that brief those most meaningful connections that we have when we do something in design that happens in the seams. That designers need to pay attention to the thresholds where exchange is actually occurring. Maybe just talk about what's the thing underneath that you were hoping that could be a call to action for designers.
Part of the task that we had as a team was to figure out how do we create a theme that is grounded and rooted in the practice of experience design, which is a very meandering and wide and accommodating practice, but still relate to the entire practice of design. And so in that, like thinking about experience design and its goal of connecting people to place and space. But I think what's even more important, connecting people to stories, and the stories dictate belonging and who we are and help us to contextualize who we are. And so when you start to think about the idea of those like themes and intersections, it's those overlaps where your story joins my story, joins another person's story, that then creates a new understanding of where we want to go and where we want to be. And so the exciting part about this theme isn't to necessarily look at either or. It's really looking at how things come together to create something new.
That's what I was going to say. So now I'm going to move on to the next question. you took my answer, New.
Oh.
No, well, it's good. It's good.
Because I think what I admire about you and your practice, and even the work that you've done, is that, and even the stories that we share with each other, is that a lot of the work itself is an act of negotiation, right? And that
Yeah.
is bringing together those things. And so in that, I mean, even with your practice now and you as a CEO, but you at Gallagher before, I guess, how does this alchemy work for you?
One thing why I think I was successful is I try to listen a lot. And
Mm,
actually, one of the other talks for today, International Design Day, was feeling the room, like knowing, and then allowing people to really speak from their heart rather than their analytical mind of like, this project is going to be this, or we want this conference to be X. It's more asking, after the annual conference in San Francisco, how do we want people to feel? I think we talked about that with the branding, right? What do we want them
mhm,
to feel when they leave and to say
mhm.
about SUGD, or how they made connections, or what that meant. And so I think we don't give space enough. So talking about the space in between, we tend to work on very finite calendars where every minute's scheduled and everything's a Zoom meeting, and we don't allow the awkward pauses
Mm,
to just be like, maybe something else could come up. What you and I can do together is going to be completely different than if I'm sitting in a separate room and you're sitting in a separate room. Like
mhm.
it's the iterative banter, the sense of humor, the maybe me feeling uncomfortable or topic doesn't sit well with me that fuels some new connection or some new creation. Yeah.
See,
Did
I
that
didn't
answer
steal your
your
answer.
question, New?
Yeah, yeah. I was gonna say I didn't steal your answer at all.
I knew it was going to go this way. I knew. I told you that. And so that leads into the next thing I wanted to talk about that you brought out of the brief that is really important. And the goal of International Design Day more broadly isn't just to speak to designers, it's really to talk to the world, the broadest community, and say, how can design solve problems, and why is design important, and what are designers' roles? And so we think about the age that we're living in, we're completely digitally overstimulated and saturated with connectivity. And
Mhm,
yet somehow we have widespread loneliness. Like, it seems, I mean, it is obvious, but in some ways you think, if we're so connected, how would people feel so disconnected? And so those physical and digital spaces are actually keeping us apart rather than bringing us together. And I think that for you is a lot of your work, right? That you do. I mean, you came to the US as a refugee and you
mhm,
spent your career kind of navigating these spaces that maybe didn't feel like they were exactly designed or built for you. And what I love is that you'll take like a very seemingly straightforward brand or story, but really nuance, getting into like the nitty-gritty of the culture or the whys to that brand. And
mhm.
like where did that start for you, and how do you bring that up to this question of how we um reconnect in meaningful ways through design?
Who did I talk to recently? I actually spoke to, oh man, I was having a conversation last week about my career, my trajectory, and one of the things that came out of it was that prior to working in a formal sense in design, I was in marketing, right? And marketing and working for big brands, doing big, cool, splashy brand campaigns. And really what it boiled down to was like manipulation, right? Like that was what my time was spent doing, was to manipulate people in order to want to consume and move towards consumption. And in moving into a formal practice of design, and the reason why I distinguish between a formal practice and then an informal practice, and then in me realizing I have a formal practice of design, I was like, oh, I've always had a practice of design. It
Hmm.
just hasn't been hasn't been formalized. But in that, part of the goal was to then say, how might we find new ways to solve problems that are embedded between us, between
Hmm.
all of us. And one of the things that I find design to be so fascinating is design as a practice is full of these like contradictions, right? That like sit in these different extremes. And I love the contradictions. I love the tensions of them. And some of the contradictions are between the tangible and the production of form and aesthetics, and what that ends up creating and how that resonates with people and how that brings people in. And then there's the intangible existential aspect of design that's about the meaning making and how do we understand who we are and what that means for us to be in this spinning rock in this galaxy. Those two things being not at odds, but informing each other and
Hmm.
working together in this way that then helps us to better understand that. But that is my philosophy in terms of the opportunity that design presents for us. Design isn't always there. Sometimes design is just purely aesthetic and driven by consumption to get you to purchase a thing. And so in that, where I get the most excited about the opportunity of design and being a designer is that design operates as a reflection of society, but then also as an intervention of society. Because then there's opportunities that we are reflecting, but then we're finding ways to create and shift new paradigms that can move us forward towards something. And so this thinking about International Design Day and even the theme and how the theme extends beyond design, it really starts to say, well, how can people participate in design without having to be a formal designer? Because design is something that's shared between all of us, and there's an intentionality that we all have in terms of shaping the world that we have now and that we want to create. And so, how do we use International Design Day, but every single day, as an opportunity to bring people into the process of shaping the world that they want to create?
You do a lot of work to bring people into the process. So, if your goal is to think about how design as a tool can rebuild connectivity in meaningful ways so that people do feel welcome, engaged, like that space is okay for them to be in, like what does that structure look like for you? Is it organic every different project and every different group, or do you have a, you were talking about, your formalized design process when you're working with community, do you have a set of like rules that you abide by, or is it different depending on the client and the goals?
It's different. It depends, but there are structures and approaches that we take, and it depends how we're showing up. So some of the projects, especially projects that live in the more squarely in the experience design space, what we've seen is that we've become a really valuable partners for traditional experience or memorial or exhibition design firms, in which where we come in is from the initial onset through community engagement and through the understanding of like what we're building and how that reflects back to the people that we're building it for or the story that we're trying to communicate. And so in that, the first line of order that we have is to at least be able to situate what's the relationship to community. And I use community in air quotes. And how
Hmm.
do we define community? The way how we define community is a feeling of fellowship around wants, needs, desires, pain points, and aspirations. So then how do we start to understand that and probe that? And that's from an external factor, but then even from an internal factor, what does it look like to align stakeholders and really suss out stakeholder desires? Because people can say they want something, but
Hmm.
then when the rubber hits the road and the rubber is the budget and the time and the road is like, okay, well, the scope and how we're going to actually do this, you start to see that there's a dissonance. And so part of our job is to be able to uncover those uncover the dissonance so that by the time we're taking the first step to engage with community, we at least have a good enough understanding of the hypothesis from the stakeholders that will allow for us to bring that forward to either be validated or to be refuted and then
Yeah.
move on from there. So that's just like one example of like how we use that structure, but it's still pretty open in terms of how it shows up because every community, every opportunity is different. And so in
Hmm.
that, the two things that we try to hold true is that we are not the voice of community. We are not going to say we know said community. We're stewards.
Yeah.
And in that, there's a responsibility to our stewardship. And also part of it is it's often thought about, and we hear this phrase all the time, like bring community to the table, like have community have a seat
Hmm.
at the table. And part of what we try to do is flip that on its head and ask, what does it look like and what does it mean for us to be worthy enough guests for community to invite us to the table? And
Yeah.
so if you think about it like you're throwing a party, like
Yeah.
okay, well, if Cybelle's party starts at 6, does it really start at 6? Do people show up at 6? Do you bring gifts? Is it shoes on or shoes off? Like all those things are taken
Well,
into
you know those
consideration.
things. You got to
Yeah,
bring your song. You got to bring your
you
song.
got
Yeah.
to. Yeah, exactly. And so I think in that, that's just like a snapshot of like just one of the approaches of work that we do. But I think there is a foundation, but it's very porous, and the porousness allows for us to fit the form that's needed based off of the engagement.
Yeah. I love that analogy. Like Joy Bailey Bryant uses the idea of like inviting someone to your house, and then once they get there, like, are you making sure that they've connected with someone, that they actually, if they don't know anybody, that you've made that connection? And then, like, do they want to come back afterwards? And it's a great analogy of how we think about our cultural institutions or placemaking, because nothing's neutral depending on what the context is for you. So, and the other thing about this partnership I want to ask you about is that you're engaging in community, and I like the idea that, you're asking for a seat at the table, but there is things that you're experts at. And so when I've found that when you ask community, like sometimes you'll ask me for working on a project and I'll tell you my opinion, but it's not actually appropriate to the solution. So, in working with community, because they don't understand the process and they're not designers, sometimes they'll say, I want a pink pony and a da 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 da, completely something. And you're like, how do you get them to realize like it's never going to be a pony, it's going to be an elephant, or like, and do it respectfully so that they can honor your expertise that you're bringing? Because that's where I think
Uh,
like it oftentimes it's either like you listen to community, but then you don't really, not you, I'm in general, the
Yeah.
design
Yeah. Yeah.
community,
Yeah.
and then there's no follow through. So they don't see themselves there. Or it's too much of like everybody gives input and it ends up really losing the spark and the greatness because it's just, it's too generic and it's too all over the board.
Yeah, that's something that I think about constantly because all community engagement led projects are tough. They're difficult. They're never easy. Part of it is that there usually is a relationship or perceived relationship between the entity, whether it's the state, whether it's whoever's funding it, and the
Right.
community. And in that, we have to see is there like rupture and repair that needs to happen here? Like, how do we
Yes.
earn the
Been
trust of
there, been
people?
there.
Right.
Yeah.
And you're like, and you come and
Don't
they're like,
shoot
oh,
the
yeah.
designer.
Yeah, exactly. Um, and then also community itself, it's a fraught word because it's like it's standing in for so many things. And so then even in terms of the relationship and the feeling of fellowship amongst these people that we're grouping together, there's also context within that we're not privy to and that we're stepping into. And so part of what I often try to echo and voice is we need to be honest and we need to be
Mhm.
upfront with what are the constraints and conditions that we've inherited, that we're stepping into this project into. And I found that it's more dangerous to overpromise and be like, let's keep it
Yeah.
open and blah. And it's like, no, 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 no. Here's here's where we can actually
That also
engage here.
doesn't help them, right? They
No,
they
no.
need more focus. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so in that, being able to understand the constraints, and then also part of it is our job as the steward is to understand what constraints are a bit more malleable. What
Mhm.
constraints can we push back on? But usually that's like in reaction to at least establishing the boundaries of the constraints. And then through that and through the conversations with community, then you start to realize like, okay, well, not every voice that we're hearing is going to have the ability to affect build. Do we need
Mhm.
communities buy-in on build? Where does
Mhm.
community come in? And that's also the very tricky thing that we always try to suss out earlier on is what is the space for community in this project, collaboration
Yeah.
within this project? What needs to be stewarded forward, like as the experts who is driving this forward, even though I try not to position it as that. I heard a statement this week that really struck me and related to this, and it was Jordan Peele was being interviewed by Ryan Coogler. And this was before Sinners came out. So this was post Get Out, before Sinners. And Ryan Coogler was asking Jordan Peele about like, what are the skill sets that you have acquired over the years that helped you become such a great director? And he was like, oh yeah, I used to do improv. I did improv for years. I did it in Chicago. Then I moved to Amsterdam and I did improv. And he said the job of improv or a comedian is to try to get as many people as possible on the same page at once. Right. And so then in that, I was like, oh, that's interesting. And that actually reflects when you start to think about community engagement because we're not going to be able to satisfy everyone. All right.
Yeah.
But what
Yeah.
is the best way for us to bring everyone as many people as possible to find what are the overlapping desires here? And that's what we try to seek out is, okay, well, this person said this person said this person said, how do these things relate? And what's the relationality, and then how can we at least capture as much of this as possible to be able to honor that and then steward that forward, but then also knowing that there is a layer of interpretation that's going to happen um,
Yeah.
based off of the constraints that we have.
Well, and two, I think allowing it to stay messy, it doesn't
Mm,
have to fit into a nice bow tie and to be fallible and to make mistakes and to own it.
yeah.
I mean, you know, I think you said early on in the conversation, like you're never going to be able to represent what that community is. Like all you're going to be able to do is advocate for them once you understand like what the scope and the breadth and their desires and all of that. And so I want to switch a little bit, but still thinking about those spaces in between or like the spaces that haven't been met or satisfied or figured out. I think of the first time I saw Deem Journal, it gave me so much joy. I feel like it filled a gap that I hadn't seen filled in a really long time. It was like getting like the best dessert you ever you didn't know that you wanted. But like
Mhm.
so talk a little bit about where did Deem come from and what was it trying or what is it trying to do? Because it seems like it is one of the few things out there that is actually covering so much of stories around design. I mean, it's not really specifically design related, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, but of like solving these big problems that need design thinking and the right voices.
Yeah. So the endeavor of Deem is to redraw the boundaries of what is design, who gets a chance to be a designer, and why. In that, Marquise, Alice, and I came together, and what we were sitting with was looking at our positions as designers at, in different varying ways. Like, how do we show up? And what we started to see was that design oftentimes was categorized in the form making, in the aesthetics, in the tangibles, in the production. And that what that left out was people who essentially were designers and work operates within design, but didn't have the proper resources or network or fidelity or education in order to produce artifacts that would be identified within the design canon, right? That people would be like, oh, that is clearly designed. And so in that, what Deem does is say, what happens if we Trojan horse many different thinkers that may sit outside of design
Yeah.
into design in order for us to re-evaluate what design is, and through that process, reevaluate the systems that design sits within. And so the question often is, what are we designing for? What are we designing around? And what are we designing against? And in that, the ultimate goal was to be able to capture and validate and elevate design in a much more expansive sense, but then also to create a level of autonomy and permission for people to not have to think about design or themselves as a designer in such a linear and strict way.
That's a lot to
Yeah.
take in. Okay. I'm just
I
going
was
to
like, you
sit
want me to
with
keep
that for
going?
a minute. No. I'm just going to sit with that for a minute. Well, I think what you do really well, and I have admired since I, first was introduced to you. I think it was via Aki, and then you came and did our branded environments event, and then I was like, oh, you should join the board. Come on. But
Yeah.
so the funny backstory here between New and I is that before he was a board member, we were redesigning our website for SEGD. You and your team did a pitch, and I think we were shortlisted down to 3 firms. And in the end, we went with a different firm for the website, really because we thought that technically, they had done more websites. But
Uh-huh.
when we read your proposal, we were like, oh my God, how do these people get SCGD? Like, we're so hard to explain, society of experiential graphic designers. Like, what do? You talk about the space in between and obscure, and your team really distilled down the essence of SCGD. And so we didn't have a scope, but we made a scope and reapproached you and said, I know we didn't hire you for the website, but would you possibly be willing to help us figure out our voice for the new website? And it also was a huge collaboration, which I'm so fortunate because we had Pentagram, we had Michael Garricky at Pentagram, we had, the web team, Wide Eye, and then we had your team, and then we had a committee of
Yeah.
designers from the board. And usually that can be disastrous, right?
Yeah.
Because,
Yeah.
somebody's got to be like, I'm in charge of this, or nobody's in charge and it doesn't get done. Maybe talk a little bit about how you untangled that, or it could be SCGD,
So,
it could just be how you do it in general. But, you take these really complex and confusing things, and then you just manage to meander around and piggyback out with all these great concepts in the bag. Like,
yeah. So I think part of it is my background and my team's background and talking about the space in between is this like we're constantly translating, and we're constantly translating between understanding brand and brand communication and how to be able to set up a brand and what is a brand. In its essence, brands are expectations that people have of you. So even when we started talking before we were recording, we are talking about like, how do we style ourselves? That's part of our brand, right? And
right.
whether you like it or not, people are forming expectations of you and all branding is to be like, okay, well, I can be more intentional about how I show up. And organizations need that because we need that in order to tell the stories that will resonate and help to persuade people towards whatever world we're trying to create. So then there's like that. Then on the other end, like we just spoke about community. Community is really just a stand-in for equity and dignity. And that is something that we're seeped in, and our work is always positioned towards and always oriented towards. And so in terms of what are the emerging topics and themes that are driving contemporary conversation when you talk about affirming futures, like that's where Deem comes in. That's part of that is Deem's whole ethos there. So then there's that world, and then there's culture, and that culture being art, design, technology, things that sit on the edge, things that are weird, things that are obscure, that then we ingest in and we take all of that in. But similar to you, a lot of it is listening. Ultimately, a lot of it is listening. And we have a firm belief that we don't have the answers. We don't bring the answers. The client has the answers. The issue is that there's too many answers for them, right?
That was
There's too many answers.
me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's
Yeah.
too many answers. So in
I
terms
got your
of
answers. I got like 100.
yeah. And so our job is to really help to instill a level of confidence in the answer and to say, out of all these answers you just provided, all of them could work. But if we focus on this one and we put effort into this one and we optimize this one, we think that this one will get you closer to what you desire. So a lot of it comes from listening. And so with the pitch for the website, I remember getting the email that we didn't win it. And for some reason I wasn't bummed because I knew I was like, oh, but we pissed our asses off. I was
We
like,
got in
I was
there.
like, I was like, I was like, I was like, whether or not we won it, I was like,
Yeah.
that exercise of thinking about this organization that's 50 years old that needs to think about the next 50 years. I was like, yeah, it was fulfilling. And so in getting the follow up to talk more squarely about brand, like that excited us because to be honest, like glue up Glue Up didn't excite us. Like doing the technical part of the SEGD website that we
Right,
knew needed
right,
to be
right.
done.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
was like, yeah, okay, well, yeah, we can do it.
We could do
So
it. Yeah.
so in that, one of the things that struck me initially when we kicked off was I felt like we were swindled and finessed because one of the deliverables was defining experience design, right? And I was just like sitting there like, wait a minute, these people have been doing this for 50 years and they cannot define it. And then they just want us to come in and they want us to come in and define it. I was like, that is not fair, but
Well,
okay.
we defined it, just not maybe in a way that, everybody could
Yeah.
understand.
And so I remember us going through like the research process. And for everybody who's listening, it's a lot of stakeholder interviews, individual stakeholder interviews, group stakeholder interviews, and what we try to suss out are tensions because we believe that it's tensions that make the brand, the story unique. So most people will be like, oh, there's tensions. Like, how do we resolve it and push it aside? I'm like, no, 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 no. Bring on the tension because that's where we're going to get something that's actually interesting and worth talking about. And so another element of the process is like analogous research. And that's like, let's look at people who share your space, but let's look at people who don't share your space. And part of that also is like, let's look at the wild, crazy world that this thing shouldn't even be presented in this context. But if we bring it into this context, what can we learn from it? The aha moment that I had that made me fall in love with SCDD was the question that we were framing up is what is experience design and who are experience designers? And that was the question that kept spinning. We kept spinning. And then there was a moment where I was like, well, what if we're not asking the right question? because what we started to see, because every single time we would try to get y'all to prioritize and focus who are SEGD members, it would start off like, okay, cool, we got it down. And then it would just open back up. It was like a slinky. It's like we have the slinky, we condensed it, and then it just like
It
fell.
just won't fit
It's
in that box. It keeps
yeah, it just
popping
won't.
out.
And I was just like, how come there's just like there's so much pushback to be very clear and focused on who we're talking to. And in that, the box that we were asking was what and who. And the shift for me, and I think the shift for the team was the box should have been when. And it was less about who's an experience designer and what is experience design, but it's more about when does experience design happen? Because experience design, by the nature of it, is a constellation, a consortium of different practitioners that have different degrees of design and research and production abilities who are coming together around one singular story, narrative, or place. And so in that, to
The
flatten it to
congregation.
yeah. So to flatten it wasn't going to do SEGD any services. And so in that shifting of the frame from what and who, but to when, to help to identify when is experience design happening. And what got me excited that I realized I was like, oh, you know what? No matter what form of design you participate in, eventually your work gets to the point that you're doing experience design,
Yeah.
but not everyone knows that.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, yeah, this is fucking rad. I was like, this is rad. And I was like, and now I get why we're
I
here.
remember your team was so excited. You know, they were like, we love experience design. Like it was that.
Yeah.
It was that.
Yeah.
It was yeah. It was a great experience. And I think that owning the tensions, owning that uh as a client, you want to be a good client, but you don't always know what to do. And so
Mm,
having that guidance and the push and pull and the back and forth and um, that the differences and even the confusion and a bit of humor about the wayward paths
mhm,
that
mhm,
projects take, like make it more exciting and more hopeful. And, you have two young kids and I
yeah.
have a brand new granddaughter. And I know we talk a lot about what we're trying to do in the world through design and our passions and our beliefs. How do you think about our role, your role, the community's role at large on behalf of kind of making a world that is the kind of world that you want your kids to be a part of? Like, how do we take the concept of the spaces in between and move that forward, not just through, um, in action, design in action?
Yeah. I mean, I think that is gonna be my PhD thesis that I need to that I need to figure out. Cause I sit in spaces of speculative imagination that's very open and very broad. And the thing that excites me about design, especially design in relation to community and activism, is that it gives us fertile space to prototype. It gives us fertile space to be able to prototype new ways of existing now, new ways of considering the future, new ways of food system, co-living, all these things. And that's what's also Deem does
Yeah.
is Deem starts to correlate those things. But those things are these prototypes that we put out there. And another thing that Deem does is that you start to realize like, oh, these prototypes aren't just one-off things. Like actually, this person in Sao Paulo is doing a community-driven radio station that this person is doing in Dalston Square in UK. Like you start to see these nodes, you start to see that, and it has an effect where people find themselves and find their community, but then people also find inspiration and encouragement to start to create these prototypes. Where I sit now is how do you get those prototypes and new ways of thinking ingested into policy, right? And
Mhm.
policy, you live in DC. And if I was to overly simplify policy, and any poli sci major who's listening, don't be mad at me, but what policy allows is for the allocation of resources and laws, but mainly resources, money, to say this person is overseeing this thing to happen, that then allows for those prototypes to scale to the point that it gets ingested into culture, that people know we do this thing, like bike lanes, right? You see bike lanes, like
It
it's,
becomes
I'm,
intentional.
yes. And so in that, I feel like, and I know people are doing this work, and it's maybe the work that my calling is drawing me towards, is what happens, how do you start to bring design into policy spaces to reshape how we see policy working for people, and thus scaling the effects that we have. And so, um, amazing work is being done by Tony L. Griffin, and she works with, can't remember the exact name of her organization, but she works with a lot of
Yeah.
mayors
Yeah.
who are in smaller cities to think about policy in those ways. And I think that is an area where it's like, okay, well, the world that we want to live in and the world that we're dreaming about, how do we actually materialize it? The first goal is to make the prototype and live within that
Yeah.
and tell everybody about it.
Right.
And then, okay, now how do we get that to the point that it can be adopted into
Yeah.
policy?
And it's Elaine Gurian, which I don't know if I introduced you to her, but we have a lot of conversation around, like, we have to prove the ROI and the ROE in really tangible ways. We're just not as good about that as designers. I'm trying to be that advocate through
Mhm.
SEGD of that, because, I mean, what makes a community healthier? What makes kids go on to, you know, have a career that they are passionate and good at and can make a living? Like, how do we make healthier, environments? Like, all of these are things that we're doing, but I don't think we're putting it all together in a package that you can say to those, policymakers, like, when you have a well-designed city, you have thriving business, you have well educated,
Mhm.
you have healthy
Mhm.
people, you have a vibrant community that takes care of each other at all different parts of their, life trajectory. So we're going to close out with a little lightning round. Just first thing that comes to your mind spontaneously, which I know you have a lot of, like,
Things that are just
difficulty doing that. Okay. So, first question is, tell me a space. It can be physical, digital, emotional, that you think is the most perfectly designed for human connection, or maybe where you go when you really want to connect with other people.
I recently gave a talk at USC, and after the talk, I did a 3 hour workshop. And one of the students who was there was like obsessed with one thing. And he asked me about it. And then somebody said to him, like, why are you so obsessed with this? And I overheard the response, and he said, it is our duty as young people to throw parties. He was obsessed with throwing parties, right? And he's like, it is our duty as young people to throw parties. And in that, I was like, he gets it. I was like, parties, convenings, bring people together. And super quick, I know it's supposed to be a lightning round, but I'm going on. I was in New Orleans last week, and I was inspired because I was with two amazing people from the Black School. They're creating a really cool design and activism school in New Orleans. And next door to their plot was a building, and I was like, "What's that building right there?" He's like, "Oh, that's it's a club." And I'm like, well, what do you mean? They're like, oh yeah, New Orleans has these like Black social service and pleasure clubs. And I'm like, social service and pleasures club. I'm like, what? And I was like, what captured me was the word pleasure and pleasure being a part of that. And so when I think about perfect spaces, I think about convening and bringing people together around joyous and
Yeah.
pleasurable moments.
What word uh, that designers say makes you want to leave the room?
Community, community.
I'm
I
going to
don't
go
know.
cut that out of this whole
I
talk.
mean, I mean,
They say it the
community
wrong
and
way, right?
community in the sense that it's a stand-in for many other things that need a bit more detail
Hmm.
to it. It's like when it's used as like a
Hmm.
blanket thing.
Okay, design fails when blank.
It's hard to say design fails because the intentions of whoever created it is one thing, and then the way it's adopted and leveraged is another thing. So I don't necessarily think that design can fail. I think the failure is in limiting what the intentions are of said design.
All right, I debate that, but we'll come back to that on another conversation.
Mhm, mhm.
Design is successful when
When it disappears.
the spaces in between.
Mhm.
And let's just end with this because I didn't get to play it when we were together in brand environments. Tell everybody what your walk up song is.
Let's give them something to talk about. Let's give them something to figure out. Talk about love. And I didn't have a
Yeah.
voice to be able to sing it.
No, you didn't have a voice. You had lost your voice because you were Mr. Germs.
Yeah, I was. And then I
God,
would
I hope
like
you didn't
see
make
people
Rick sick. That would have been
I, and
bad.
and it was horrible because I would see people and I would either shake their hand or I'd give them a hug, and then immediately after
Oh,
I'd
I
be like, "Oh yeah,
know.
I lost my." But I wasn't contagious at that point.
Yeah, you kept saying that. But the funny thing is we're watching the videos now and you're like can't pronounce anything because your voice was so bad.
I'm
But
like,
I'm glad that you're better and your voice was great. And
yes,
I'm so appreciative for your friendship and your collaboration and that you made time for this conversation and for helping with the theme of International Design Day. And I think you have a great provocation for all of us to figure out how we can get um, leaders and cities and policymakers to bring design to the forefront of how we design and problem solve for the future for your adorable children. And your
yeah,
daughter's
for
going
your
to be in
grand.
charge. You know that. She's going to be in charge in like another
She's already
year.
in charge.
She's going to
She's
be
already
mayor.
in charge.
She's mayor of LA, the youngest mayor ever of Los Angeles. Oh my goodness.
And
All
she's
right.
like, I'm gonna institute no bedtimes.
No
We're like, yeah,
bedtimes.
no
That's the new
bedtime.
law. If
Yeah.
you move to Los Angeles, you can go to bed whenever you want. It doesn't matter how old you are. You get to decide.
Hmm.
I think
Yeah,
that's good design. All right.
exactly.
Well, thanks,
Awesome. Well, thank
New.
you.